Squad 66. Life got busy on me. Dang. And unfortunately, when life gets busy, sometimes life isn't as fun. And so this really interesting little whoop has sat in a really interesting little box for far longer than it ever deserved to. And that is on me, but to some degree, like outside my control. It is what it is. But here we are. No going backwards, so we can only go forwards. But this whoop, the reason it's so interesting, if you don't recognize it off the bat, is maybe because it has changed form over time. Maybe it's because you haven't heard about the wandering whoop. So this idea, so Jesse Perkins, he is essentially the originator of tiny whoops in general. My understanding is he's the first guy that took the little blade inductrix and put FPV gear on it and really just basically gave birth to the whole genre. Which is really kind of impressive for one person to do, really have that big of an impact. And he's a super creative guy, and you can just see that in what he brought to FPV, and also what he continues to bring with, like, I mean, just looking at this project. So the Wandering Whoop project is a really interesting idea, and the idea is like, what happens if we take a whoop, throw it in a box with a bunch of parts, and then just send it to people and see what they do with it, see how they like bring their different interests in FPV and creativity and just make changes. So basically kind of the rule is, and I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, but you basically make a change to it, fly it some, make some content, and then pass it on and let the whoop have an adventure, which is kind of a really interesting idea. And I really appreciate the creativity that kind of Jesse developed this idea, because it's pretty interesting. So this whoop, it has gone through a couple of people, and if you haven't seen the videos, definitely check them out. It's gone through Infinity Loops, who does all that great like freestyle, does it freestyle videos of like micros and tiny whoops, and really focused on kind of like, I don't know, a lot of the vibe of tiny whoops and FPV. It's also gone to Chris Rosser. Obviously, he's like very heavy on the science side, which is fantastic. A lot of testing, and so I think the motors and like props, maybe, I don't know, those came from that side of things. And then more recently, I got this actually from Aaron Ciotti. So Ciotti has been around forever, and he was one of the guys who was doing like, I think like 3-inch micros while everybody else was all stuck on the 5-inch. And he's done a lot of stuff with whoops, testing like insane amounts of testing, like trying different things over and over again with different setups and coming up with what works and what doesn't work. And so then and currently now coming my way. So I thought the first part of this video is really just to look at where is the whoop right now, and then what change do I want to bring to it. And so where we stand now, so the board is a Happy model board. It is a BMI 270 gyro. I know that mainly because I plugged it in and looked at it in Betaflight. And then other things it has on here, it has the newbie drone cockroach frame. So this is the latest lightweight version, but it is not the AF version. I think the AF version, I think, makes a little bit too much sacrifice to, and I agree with Ciotti on this one. I think I don't know, chicken or egg, who like really kind of came to this conclusion first. Maybe we just did at the same time, but I think the best balance of frames out there right now is this newbie drone cockroach frame. It's like the V3, and they do make one lighter, but the hoops just get too thin and there's too much noise. It's too fragile. And unless you are just really going after pure lightweight, I don't think that frame makes as much sense as this one, because this one is marginally heavier, but makes a big difference in controlling the noise, controlling the damping, and is sturdy. It holds up well. So the frame that's on there, the motors that are on here. So I have flown this, and full disclosure, I've been so busy, I haven't flown much at all in the past, like probably, I don't know, 6 weeks, maybe something like that. And so when I started flying this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing feels weird and it's hard to fly. And I'm thinking, well, is it the whoop or is it me? And it's sure enough me, because I took out some of my daily driver drones, whoops that used to be my daily drivers, and tried to fly those. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these are even harder to fly. And like, I can't believe I would get this thing around my house. So part of this too is, I think I need to kind of like freshen the skills up really quickly to get some little decent flight footage out of this. So let me keep going. The motors that are on here are Tiny Whoop motors, and they are the 0702, and they are the 32,000 kV motors, and kind of a nice color. I like that. Sort of a kind of this light blue, silvery blue color. The props are the HQ tri-blades. I'm assuming these are the pitchier tri-blades. I'm not 100% sure on that because I don't think they really get labeled, but they look like they've got the better, slightly higher pitch on them, which I think is the superior prop. I think the lower pitch tri-blade is, I don't know, it's an answer in want of a solution. Other things that this has, camera, I'm assuming this is the Tiny Whip pinch cam. I haven't flown a pinch cam before, so that was kind of fun. It definitely looked different than what I've flown in the past, so I think it was very bright. It's kind of interesting, very bright, which I like for my house. My house tends to, when I fly inside, is kind of dark, so it's nice to have these cameras that are essentially to some degree overexposed, but it makes it look brighter and cheerier. And it's, in my setting, it makes it easy to see. The camera mounts, I don't know which camera mount this is. Newbie Drone has a style like that, but the material doesn't, to me, feel like that. So I'm not really sure on that. For the VTX antenna, it's got one of these ORT little antennas. And then on the back, we got a BT2 with the little 90 degree, or I should say, it's not 90 degree, that's a 180 degree, with a little PCB board, and it's got little LEDs at the back. So adds a little bit of weight, obviously, but actually looks pretty cool because you got these LEDs shining backwards at you. I think it does look pretty cool. I'll hook this up to Betaflight, and I'll show you the tune that's on here and the filtering that's on here. We'll talk about that. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, but I think I already have my thoughts on the change I want to make, mainly because with my whoops, I'm not a big fan of the camera sitting higher than it needs to be, and I'm also not a fan of this up here potentially becoming a little vibration generator, a little oscillator, a little thing to like put bad vibes down into the gyro and compromise that. And so I'm thinking I'd like to get this camera both lower and also further forward and a little bit more up tilt. Now, in all fairness to this mount, there's more holes here. So when I flew this was a very shallow camera angle, and it felt really funny because the roll was almost like pure roll. So when you're really flat and you roll, you just go side to side like this. As you pitch forward and you start to roll, see how the camera moves in a different arc? So watch this camera. So if we're perfectly flat, the camera rotates on axis, but as you go up in camera tilt and you roll, the camera starts to move and it doesn't rotate on axis, and that gives you a different perspective. And when I first flew this, I was like, wow, this feels funny. Yet it was easy to fly, and then I realized, wow, I'm going nowhere. This is super slow. And then, yeah, I kind of look at the camera and you're like, yeah, it's not got much, there's just not a whole lot of tilt in there. And so I think that's a lot of what I was feeling. Okay, let's hook this up to Betaflight. We'll go through that and talk a little bit more there.
All right, jumping into Betaflight. So I've got our little wandering whoop hooked up to Betaflight. And so it's kind of fun to take a look and see what how it's been set up, and also just kind of double check things, make sure nothing's too squirrely. So with our PID loop frequency, we've got 3.2, 3.2, so this is the standard for the BMI. One of the things I typically do is I throw air mode on a switch because for freestyle, you want air mode, absolutely. But I think if you're flying more kind of like proximity stuff in terms of like racy style gates and things like that, and you don't want to get stuck to walls, you want to turn Betaflight off when you're doing that. Other things pretty straightforward. Some of the voltage and things like that. And then I kind of got curious and didn't go through all the settings, but jumped right to the PID, because one of the things Ciati had mentioned was that he never really got the tune to a level where he was happy. And sure enough, when we look at this, these are pretty tame PIDs for a whoop. So with whoops, back in the day, like with the Project Mockingbird days with Patrick Clark, we had really high PIDs. So the motors were underpowered. They were 0802. They're kind of heavy, low kV, and so we ended up with PIDs like pushing this up to like, with the proportional like up to 100. And so we've certainly been able to come back down there because, with these 0702 high kV and super light props, we've been able to push it down. But this is still pretty tame. If we look at the master multiplier 105, and the rest of this stuff was like kind of pretty vanilla without anything getting too crazy. And the only thing I'm seeing here is that's different than how I would set it up is the feed forward actually pushed even further down. And I'll get to that later, but I don't think that's the key kind of point here. But anyways, this tune was seen pretty weak, and I did, on a couple of flights try and push that master multiplier up, and I agreed, like there wasn't much room to push this up, which seemed kind of funny. Like, why are we on such tame PIDs? And so, because the motors we have on there aren't crazy high kV, they're pretty decently powerful, but I think we've done higher and been able to push PIDs higher. So one of the things I thought about is if you're getting a quad from Ciati, one of the things you want to check is the condition of the motor. So he pushes his whoops really hard, and they encounter some solid objects like walls at high rates of speed, which I really love because if Ciati does something and if he tests something and says it's durable, it's for sure durable. But that also means like let's do our due diligence. So this quad in particular doesn't have black box, but we can still go ahead and one by one spin up our motors and just check and see if any one of the motors has more vibration in it or has kind of rough spot somewhere in the mid throttle range or something to give us a hint where there's excess noise coming into the system. And I did that, and surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, I don't think he killed this whoop like he did to some of the other ones he tests, but the motor spinned up fine. Everything seemed pretty smooth. The prop seemed pretty well balanced. Nothing seemed like too out of whack there. So I didn't have an obvious explanation. Looking at through the build, nothing looked funny other than my one thought was the ORT antenna that he's got kind of dangling out the top. Maybe that's a little bit of a source of resonance, to resonate back and forth. But other than that, the build looked pretty solid. It's on the newbie drone, their latest cockroach frame, but it's not the AF. It's not the crazy light one. And so it's got pretty decent like noise dampening. So it didn't look like a real obvious mechanical issue. So one of the things I thought was, well, let me try and add some filtering. When I looked at the filtering, I was like, this is kind of funny. This is a little bit odd, but it seems like it's getting angry. So let me try adding some filtering. So looking through it, I thought one of the easiest things to add would be, let me add one more dynamic notch. I found that some quads really, especially these little whoops, really benefit from having two dynamic notches. I did that, and interestingly, the quad got worse. And so then I'm like, well, this is strange. This doesn't make sense. But digging into the filters a little bit more, so gyro low pass was 1. Low pass 1 was off, but then 2, pretty low, 135. This is a lot of gyro low pass filtering, and I reached out and messaged Ciati and kind of asked him about that, and what he said was that this was the Brandon Baked Beans tuning strategy for the BMI gyro, so which made a whole lot more sense. So what Brandon's strategy was, like, this was kind of like earlier when we didn't really have the BMI fully figured out, was that let's just turn off the hardware filtering and let's filter it like an MPU 6000. Let's kind of give it quite a bit of low pass filtering, and then that way the rest of our filtering can be kind of vanilla, kind of what we're used to. But something wasn't quite working right here. And digging through, I think I figured it out. So the clue was that we were over-filtered, and so if we get, let me remember what this is, gyro hardware. So at one of the updates, the default setting for the BMI, the gyro hardware low pass filter, normal is like the most filtered option, and the experimental was turning it fully off. And I think initially the default from the BMI was like option 1 or option 2, which was kind of this lighter filtering, if I'm remembering it all correctly. But I think what we have here is normal, and Brandon's strategy was to turn it off. So basically, if this wasn't off, we were effectively, if we come back here, we were effectively doubling up on this low pass filter with 135. So I think that was the culprit. The culprit wasn't the PIDs were too high. The culprit wasn't mechanical noise. The culprit was all the latency from doubling up on this gyro low pass filtering. So I'm going to test that. So this is sort of like, hey, this is how I got the whoop part of the video, but the follow-up video is going to be, well, let me like put my tweaks on it. Let me put my influence onto this quad. And so one of those things are going to be that I'm going to try and do is go back to my typical filtering strategy for my BMI little whoops and see if we can use that and now go ahead and be able to push our PIDs up higher, which I expect we probably will. Other things. So one of the things, me and Siadi are pretty different on this. I think he's got a lot of like the idea of wanting his camera to get through the air very smooth. I think a lot because of his background of flying like bigger outdoor spaces and flying the filming stuff that he does. And my take on it is different. I'm like going to react at the last second to something coming up that I'm not expecting to. And so really with the feed forward, I tend to push it up even higher than baseline versus Siadi tends to push it down. And so one of the things I kind of wanted to say was, well, like, this is the wrong approach. And the reason I say that this is the wrong approach to do that, to get smoothness out of your quad, is because all our PIDs are basically error. So if you look at your P is not proportional to how you're moving the stick. The P is proportional to what's the difference between your set point and what the quad is doing. It's error. So until error accumulates, this P does nothing. And so it's because you're flying on air, it's always going to be behind, and that's always going to be detrimental to your PID loop working as well as it can. Similar thing for integral. Integral like is even more so. The error adds up and things like that. So in my mind, feed forward is like the ultimate cheat code for the PID loop because it's responding to your stick movement. It is giving the gyro, it is giving the feed loop, feeding in to the PID loop information before the error even accumulates. It's feeding in before that problem even happens. And I think feed forward is the most wonderful thing on the planet for the PID loop, and so I like to push it up. And in my mind, it's like, let's keep the feed forward high, but if you want it smooth, then let's go someplace else. It's fine. Like if you want really smooth quad, let's smooth it out. And one of the places to do that is in your rates. And I wish I had Siadi's rates on here because his rates, these are my rates. I kind of came up with this pretty simple thing of just 400, 900, no expo, and that gives me a profile I like. I've tried turning my max down even further, but it throws off the timing on my snap rolls. So I found for me, something in my brain works at 900, and then the 400 for the sensitivity kind of dials in my like split S and my smaller maneuvers. So that works for me. On Siadi's rates, his rates, he had like way more expo in here, and so it was like I felt like I was like stuck in mud. Like I jammed the stick and it does nothing. So I'm like, okay, fair. Like you didn't have enough, like you're already doing it on your stick. So then the other part, I kind of wanted to come back and say, well, if you don't like feed forward, then smooth out your signal, like smooth out your stick motion input. And so I came over here to the receiver tab. And so the way you smooth this out is this auto factor. And then I look at the auto factor and I'm like, my God, this auto factor is at 140. And if you read the little like bullets, you know, where is it? I think default's 30, right? So default is 30. And then they're like, for smoother stuff, so 60 for like HD freestyle. And then the max they're even suggesting 90 to 120 for cinematic flying. And so Ciati's already out here at 140. So I guess, yeah, if you have as much expo and low rates as he does, and you're still using 140 and it's still too twitchy for you, like you still need it smoother, yes, I agree. And so I agree that if that's what you're trying to achieve, okay, fine, knock down your feed forward, because there's nothing else that's going to, like, you know, smooth that out any further, because you've already done it with the RC link with your set point smoothing. You've done it with your rates. But anyways, that's one of the things I'm going to mess with, because I like my quads a little high strung and twitchy. What else? Some of the other things, like, you know, thrust linearization, VBAT side compensation, I think we can take advantage of those. Interestingly enough, this one came with dynamic idle off, and I kind of messed around with putting it on, and I don't think I liked it, and it's made me rethink for whoops. I think the dynamic idle kind of makes the hover point a little bit funny, like the throttle chops a little bit like harsher, I think. And so it kind of made me rethink it. It's kind of interesting. You get somebody else's thing, you test it out, and you're like, it forces you to kind of reevaluate some of your assumptions. I always thought dynamic idle should be this great thing, and I think for whoops, it just doesn't quite do what, I don't like the way it feels. And so that made me kind of think of going back to just the regular old, motor idle, and going with that. I think those were the big things I saw in here. So yeah, you know, structurally, I think the thing that I didn't like, or the point of this whoop that I thought like was a good target for me to like put my little stamp on it was going to be thinking about this canopy. And then the other thing I want to do is get in here and tune this and see if we can't push these PIDs up and lock this quad in a little bit better. All right, so that's part one. And I apologize to everybody involved in this thing. I feel like I've left this so long that I'm not disrespecting the other people. I feel like I am not respecting the other people involved in this. And so I apologize for that. Life just got absolutely crazy on me, and I am back to it now. And so look for another video coming up with my changes. And then I will maybe try and do something cool with it, and then send it on to the next person. All right, till next time, cheers.